The transmission crackled across every communication channel in the Kepler sector, cutting through battle chatter and emergency frequencies like a blade through silk. Caution! A human warship has entered the war zone. The automated warning repeated 3 times before dissolving into static. Across 1,000 alien bridges, commanders froze. Weapon systems powered down mid-charge. Even the dying screams of burning ships seemed to quiet in anticipation of what was coming. The Andromedan War had raged for 6 cycles, turning entire star systems into graveyards of twisted metal and shattered dreams. The hegemony's crimson fleet stretched across the void like a cancer, their bioships pulsing with malevolent hunger. Against them stood the Federation's silver armadas, their crystalline hulls reflecting the light of dying suns. Between these titans, smaller species fought for scraps, for survival, for the right to exist in a galaxy that had forgotten mercy. Gethera Prime burned in the distance, its once proud cities now craters of molten glass. The orbital shipyards that had built 100,000 vessels were nothing but expanding debris clouds, each piece a testament to the war's insatiable appetite. This wasn't conquest anymore, was extinction wearing the mask of victory. The strongest would inherit ash and silence. In the depths of the hegemony command ship Eternal Devourer, Admiral Krex studied the tactical display with compound eyes that had witnessed the fall of empires. His Catonus fingers traced the deployment patterns of his fleet. 2,000 bio-dreadnoughts, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent weapons arrays. Each ship was a predator evolved for war, bred in the spawning pools of distant worlds where might determined survival. The Federation forces arrayed against him were equally impressive. Admiral Thane's crystalline fleet caught the light of binary stars, their hulls singing with harmonic frequencies that could shatter mountains. These weren't just warships, they were works of art, each curve and edge designed to channel the very forces of creation into instruments of destruction. The space between the fleets crackled with tension, gravity wells and energy fields creating a maze of death that neither side dared cross. In the neutral zones, scavenger fleets picked through the bones of fallen civilizations. The Kythera merchants had grown fat on war profits, their trade vessels loaded with weapons that would kill millions. The Zelani mystics spoke of prophecies written in stellar fire, of a species that walked between worlds and turned defeat into legend. But prophecies were for the weak. In the void, only strength mattered. The War Council chamber aboard Eternal Devourer thrummed with barely contained violence. 12 species had gathered in an unprecedented alliance, their hatred for each other temporarily overshadowed by a greater fear. The holographic display showed intelligence reports that should have been impossible. A single ship, no escort, no support fleet. Just one vessel bearing the markings of a species most believed to be myth. Humans don't exist, snarled General Vex of the Talon Imperium, his razor-sharp teeth gleaming. Their stories told by defeated commanders to explain their failures. But his voice carried uncertainty. The reports were consistent across too many fronts, too many witnesses. Ships that appeared from nowhere, fought with impossible tactics, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Commander Zilith of the Void Seekers had seen the footage herself. A human frigate had held off an entire battle group for 7 hours, its weapons firing in patterns that defied tactical doctrine. When her ships finally closed to boarding range, they found the vessel empty, except for automated systems, and a message burned into the bulkhead in a dozen languages. We were here. We remember. We return. The debate raged for hours, voices rising and falling like tides of fear. Some spoke of death worlds, where gravity crushed bones and atmosphere burned lungs. Others whispered of pack hunters, who turned entire ecosystems into hunting grounds. The Andromedan archives held fragments of data from the early expansion, when first contact had gone so catastrophically wrong that entire star systems had been quarantined. Now those quarantines were breaking. On the bridge of the Federation flagship Harmony's Edge, Admiral Thane received the same reports with growing unease. His species had achieved spaceflight when the galaxy was young, had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. In all that time, they had learned one fundamental truth. Evolution created specialists, not gods. Yet every report about humans suggested something that challenged that belief. The tactical display showed impossible maneuvers, weapons that bent physics, and most disturbing of all, a complete disregard for conventional military doctrine. Human ships didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They fought until their hulls were breached and their reactors went critical, and sometimes they kept fighting even after that. It was madness. It was terrifying. It was effective. The first detection came from the outer sensor grid, a gravitational anomaly that made the fabric of space-time shiver. Both fleets' early warning systems screamed as something massive tore through the hyperspace barrier like paper. Emergency klaxons wailed across 10,000 ships as crews scrambled to battle stations they thought they already manned. The hyperspace tier expanded, bleeding exotic radiation and twisted geometry into normal space. Through the wound in reality, something emerged that defied every assumption about starship design. It wasn't built, it had been forged, beaten into shape by wars that had tested every rivet and plate. The hull was dark as the void between stars, scarred by weapons that could crack planets. The human warship Defiance measured 3 kilometers from bow to stern, but size wasn't what made veteran captains reach for emergency sedatives. It was the wrongness of it, the way it seemed to bend space around itself. The feeling that looking at it too long would show truths that organic minds weren't meant to process. Sensor arrays that could map individual atoms failed to penetrate its hull. It was less a ship than a hole in the universe shaped like war. No escort ships emerged. No support fleet materialized from hyperspace. Just one vessel, alone against combined armadas that numbered in the thousands. The silence stretched for long seconds as both sides processed what they were seeing. Then the hegemony fleet opened fire. Energy beams that could boil oceans lanced across the void, converging on the human ship like the fingers of an angry god. Plasma cannons designed to crack dreadnought armor discharged in synchronized volleys. The space around Defiance became a furnace of raw destruction that should have vaporized any known material. The human ship's shields flared to life, and reality hiccuped. The energy strikes didn't dissipate or deflect, they simply stopped existing. As if the universe had decided they never happened. For a moment, that stretched into eternity, Defiance hung motionless in the center of an inferno that couldn't touch it. Then the humans fired back. The first railgun discharge lit up the void like a newborn star. Projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed tore through the hegemony's bioships. Each impact releasing enough kinetic energy to level continents. But these weren't random shots, they were surgical strikes. Each round precisely calculated to cause maximum systemic damage. Missile pods opened along Defiance's hull like mechanical flowers, launching swarms of warheads that moved with predatory intelligence. These weren't fire-and-forget weapons, they were hunting packs, coordinating their attacks with an artificial cunning that turned evasive maneuvers into elaborate death spirals. 3 hegemony dreadnoughts died in the first minute, their biohulls ruptured and bleeding into space. The Federation fleet, caught between terror and opportunity, opened fire on both enemies. Their crystalline weapons sang hymns of destruction, harmonic frequencies that could shatter molecular bonds. But against the human ship, their attacks simply vanished into whatever impossible technology protected Defiance. Against the hegemony forces, they were devastatingly effective. Admiral Craig screamed orders through bioneural links, trying to coordinate a response that made tactical sense. But how do you fight something that ignored the fundamental laws of warfare? His ships couldn't penetrate those shields. His bioweapons couldn't find purchase on that alien hull. Every attack was absorbed, analyzed, and countered with precision that bordered on prescience. The human counterattack intensified. Beam weapons that existed in theoretical physics textbooks carved through the hegemony line like scalpels through flesh. Plasma charges detonated inside bioships, turning living vessels into expanding clouds of superheated gas. The careful formations that had taken decades to perfect dissolved into chaos as captains fled in terror. On the Federation side, Admiral Thane watched his tactical display with growing amazement. Defiance wasn't just winning, it was rewriting the fundamental assumptions of space combat. Individual targeting systems tracked thousands of enemies simultaneously, while point defense networks created impenetrable barriers of destruction. It was like watching a master artisan at work, turning war into deadly art. Inside Defiance, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency that spoke of battles fought in systems whose names were classified beyond top secret. Captain Marcus Volkov studied the tactical display with eyes that had seen Earth burn and rise from its ashes stronger than before. His crew moved like components of a single organism, each action precise and purposeful. Gravitational lance charging. Captain, reported the weapons officer, her voice carrying the flat calm of someone who had stared into hell and found it wanting. Targeting the hegemony command cluster. The weapon they were about to deploy existed only in human arsenals. A product of desperate innovation and the willingness to weaponize the fundamental forces of the universe. The lance fired, and space-time screamed. A focused beam of gravitational force tore across the void, bending light and warping reality in its wake. Where it touched the hegemony command ships, matter simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. The Eternal Devourer and its escorts didn't explode, they folded in on themselves, crushed by forces that turned stars into diamonds. Across the battlefield, surviving commanders sent desperate messages to their homeworlds. Retreat, all ships retreat. This isn't war, this is extermination. But even as fleets burned and died around it, Defiance pressed forward with implacable purpose. It wasn't seeking conquest or territory. It was delivering a message written in fire and vacuum. Humanity was no longer prey. The Federation ships began to disengage, their crews overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. These weren't the same humans mentioned in ancient archives. This wasn't a species struggling to leave its homeworld. This was something forged in the crucibles of wars that had tested every assumption about survival and strength. As the last hegemony bioships died in brilliant flashes of uncontrolled fusion, silence returned to the Kepler sector. Defiance hung motionless in space, its dark hull reflecting the light of distant stars. Sensor ghosts and energy readings suggested it was scanning the debris field, cataloging the dead, learning from their final moments. On 1,000 bridges across the galaxy, the same question echoed in minds that struggled to process what their instruments had recorded. If this was one worshipper, single vessel operating alone in hostile space, what would happen if Earth decided to send a fleet? The answer came in whispered reports from intelligence networks and deep space monitoring stations. Humanity hadn't sent one ship. They had sent a herald, a messenger, whose purpose was to announce that the galaxy's newest predators were no longer content to hide in the shadows between stars. The transmission repeated across every frequency, carried by relay stations and quantum entanglement networks to the furthest reaches of explored space. Caution, a human warship has entered the war zone. But now the words carried different weight. This wasn't a warning, it was a promise. The universe had a new apex predator, and it wore the face of a species that had learned to turn extinction into evolution. Defiance engaged its hyperdrive and vanished into the void, leaving behind only debris fields and legends that would reshape galactic civilization. In the silence that followed, survivors began to understand a truth that would haunt their dreams and reshape their strategies. Humans were no longer the hunted. They had become something far more dangerous. The warning would echo across the stars for generations to come, a testament to the night when prey became predators and the galaxy learned to fear the dark between worlds.